Welcome to the DOGE Diaries, diving deep into government efficiency. What a world we live in. I'm just buzzing with ideas about how we can make things better, faster, more efficient. It's a new dawn, people, a new dawn.
Well, a new dawn for some, maybe. I'm just trying to make sure that new dawn doesn't leave the rest of us in the dark, you know? Efficiency is great, but not if it comes at the expense of the average Joe.
I think we need to be realistic about what better, faster, more efficient actually means in the context of the US government. It's not like we can just wave a magic wand and suddenly everything is perfect. The system is already the best in the world. It needs incremental improvements. A new dawn sounds nice, but I prefer a steady, well-lit morning. Thank you very much.
Oh, but Sarah, you're missing the point. The system can be fundamentally better. We have the technology, we have the vision. Think about it. A truly streamlined government powered by innovation. It's not a pipe dream, it's an achievable goal. We have to be open to disruptive technologies. The world isn't what it used to be.
Hold on. Disruptive often translates to expensive for regular folks. Like I read about this family business in Nashville potentially having to move overseas because of tariffs. That's disruptive, all right, disruptive to their livelihood. How is that making the world a better place? Is that for efficiency?
Exactly. And that's the problem with these broad sweeping changes. They often have unintended consequences that hurt the people they're supposedly trying to help. Those tariffs, for example, are a complex issue. The idea is to protect American businesses, but the reality can be very different. Incremental changes and improvements would be the path to follow, not disruption.
Yes, and this is a big but. What if those short-term pains are necessary for long-term gain? What if those tariffs force businesses to innovate, to become more competitive? What if they create new opportunities that we can't even foresee yet? We need to see the big picture. Also, remember the Financial Times report that showed savings revisions that didn't really reflect in reality? It shows that the current system needs radical change to even begin to be accurate.
I'm not sure many businesses can afford to wait for those foreseen opportunities. We are discussing DOGE today, right? Efficiency? How about that article about DOGE aiming to revamp the old retirement application process? That whole salt mine facility thing sounds like throwing good money after bad. That's my retirement money that they're playing with.
Otto, you're right to be concerned, and that's a perfect example of where these so-called efficiency measures can go wrong. Sure, digitalizing government pensions sounds great. But what about the people who aren't tech savvy? The elderly, those in rural areas with limited internet access? Are they just supposed to be left behind?
That's where the visionary leadership comes in. We can't just digitize and forget. We need to provide training, support, access. Think of it as an opportunity to bridge the digital divide, to empower those communities that are currently underserved. It's not just about efficiency, it's about inclusivity.
Inclusivity by cutting funding for AmeriCorps. I saw that DOGE is doing that. How does cutting services to the most vulnerable count as efficiency? I am sorry, but that's just moving the money to their friends in the industry.
I completely agree, Otto. Cutting AmeriCorps while claiming to be about efficiency is deeply troubling. Programs like that are essential for supporting communities and addressing critical needs. It's short-sighted and frankly morally questionable, and it throws the whole efficiency argument into doubt.
But maybe those cuts are part of a larger strategy. Maybe they're freeing up resources to invest in even more effective programs in the future. Maybe they know AmeriCorps is running inefficiently and will come back stronger and more effective. We can't just assume the worst. We need to trust in the vision.
Trust? I think the public is losing trust with every one of these moves. The constant revisions to DOGE's claimed savings, the tariffs, the AmeriCorps cuts, it all adds up to a sense that the government isn't really looking out for the average person.
And that's why transparency and accountability are so crucial. We need to be able to see where the money is going, how decisions are being made, and what the actual impact of these policies is. Without that, it's just a mess.
But transparency can be stifling. It can slow down progress. Sometimes you need to make bold moves, to take risks, to trust your instincts. You can't get bogged down in endless committees and bureaucratic red tape. You need to move fast and break things.
Move fast and break things? That sounds like my grandma trying to use an iPad. It's not a good thing when the government is breaking things, especially when those things are the programs and services that people rely on.
Exactly. We need to think long-term, not just about quick wins and flashy headlines. Sustainability, stability, reliability. Those are the qualities that truly matter in a government. building on a solid foundation, not tearing it down and starting over.
But what if the foundation is flawed? What if it's built on outdated assumptions and inefficient processes? Sometimes you do need to tear it down and rebuild from scratch with new materials and a new design. And that requires a bold vision, a willingness to challenge the status quo, and a fearless leader.
A fearless leader who's also out of touch with reality is just a recipe for disaster. I want a leader who understands the struggles of everyday people, who's focused on making things better for everyone, not just those at the top. The status quo isn't great for me, but at least it's predictable.
I think we need to be careful about idealizing the past either. The good old days weren't always so good for everyone. The key is to learn from the past, acknowledge our mistakes, and strive for continuous improvement. But that improvement needs to be grounded in reality, not in some utopian vision.
But without a utopian vision, what are we striving for? What's the point of all this improvement if we're not aiming for something truly extraordinary? We need to dream big, to imagine a better future, and then work tirelessly to make that future a reality. It's the American dream.
The American dream shouldn't be about pie-in-the-sky ideas that never pan out. It should be about a fair chance for everyone to succeed, to have a decent job, a roof over their head, and enough to provide for their families. And right now, that dream feels like it's slipping away for a lot of people.
I think the American dream is still alive and well, but it requires hard work, dedication, and a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. And it also requires a government that is responsible, accountable, and focused on creating a level playing field for everyone. We need efficiency, yes, but we also need compassion and understanding. We need to be thoughtful in how we approach a changing world.
Compassion and understanding are crucial, absolutely. But we can't let those values paralyze us. We need to be bold, to be innovative, to be willing to take risks in order to create a truly better world. Think about the digitalization of government pensions. That's a real opportunity to improve efficiency and accessibility, but only if we do it right.
Doing it right means making sure that everyone has access to the technology and support they need. It means not leaving anyone behind. And it means not assuming that everyone is as comfortable with computers as the folks designing these systems. My dad had problems trying to get his benefits online. It took days.
And it means thoroughly testing these systems before they're rolled out to make sure they're actually working as intended. I wonder how many people are truly saving time through this new system or experiencing a slow and bureaucratic process. I want the government to be effective.
Testing is important, of course, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Sometimes you just have to launch, to iterate, to learn from your mistakes. That's how innovation happens. This is how technology works and how we have gotten to where we are now.
Learning from your mistakes is fine, but not when those mistakes are messing with people's retirements. I have no time for these learning curves. I need to know my money is being managed correctly.
Exactly. We're talking about people's livelihoods, their financial security. This isn't a game. It's not some Silicon Valley startup where you can afford to fail fast. The stakes are too high. People trust that the system we currently have is not taking excessive risks.
But what if the current system is failing people? What if it's so bogged down in inefficiency and bureaucracy that it's actively harming their financial security? Sometimes you have to take risks to break free from that. We have the tech to make a better and more efficient program.
I think you're underestimating the value of stability and predictability. I think most people would rather have a system that's a little bit slow and inefficient, but reliably delivers their benefits than a system that's cutting edge, but prone to glitches and errors.
I agree, and I think it's dangerous to equate efficiency with goodness. There are other values that are just as important, if not more so. Fairness, equity, compassion, justice. We need to make sure that we're not sacrificing those values on the altar of efficiency, especially in crypto.
But what if we can have both? What if we can create a system that's both efficient and equitable? A system that's powered by cutting-edge technology and guided by a strong moral compass? That's the kind of future I believe is possible.
I'd like to believe that too, but I need to see some concrete evidence before I'm convinced. I need to see that these so-called efficiency measures are actually benefiting the average person, not just the wealthy and well-connected.
And I need to see that these changes are being implemented responsibly, with careful consideration for the potential consequences. We need to be smart, deliberate, and thoughtful in how we approach the future. DOGE might be great, but it needs parameters.
We will get there. Now let's discuss government-mandated crypto-specific KYC/AML regulations. How do these influence our access to DOGE?
KYC/AML. Know your customer and anti-money laundering, right? So basically, the government wants to know who's buying and selling Dogecoin and what they're using it for.
Exactly. It's about preventing illicit activities like money laundering, terrorist financing, and tax evasion. The idea is that by requiring crypto exchanges and other platforms to collect and verify user information, it becomes harder for criminals to use cryptocurrencies for illegal purposes.
But doesn't that undermine the whole point of crypto, the idea of decentralized anonymous transactions? It feels like a huge overreach by the government, trying to control something that's inherently meant to be free and open. How does it make money accessible if all the steps make it more complicated?
Well, it definitely makes it harder for the average person to get involved. All that paperwork, the ID verification, it can be intimidating, especially for people who aren't tech savvy or who don't trust the government with their personal information.
I understand the concerns about privacy, but I think it's a necessary trade-off. We can't just let criminals run wild with cryptocurrencies. There needs to be some level of regulation to protect the integrity of the financial system and prevent illicit activities. If DOGE is to become mainstream, it needs to abide by the rules.
But what about people in countries with oppressive regimes? For them, crypto can be a lifeline, a way to bypass government censorship and control. KYC/AML regulations could effectively cut them off from that lifeline. This seems very short-sighted. Are there any other countries to see an example from?
And what about people who just want to use crypto for everyday transactions, like buying coffee or paying rent? Do they really need to be subjected to all this scrutiny just to use a digital currency?
I think there's a balance to be struck. Maybe we can have different levels of KYC/AML requirements depending on the amount of crypto being transacted. Small transactions could be subject to less stringent rules, while larger transactions would require more thorough verification. That seems fair.
But who gets to decide what's small and what's large? And what about the potential for discrimination? Could these regulations be used to target specific demographics or communities? We are back to the fairness argument again. What could DOGE do better than current implementations?
Yeah, I can see that happening. It's always the most vulnerable who get hit the hardest by these kinds of rules. People with limited access to banking services, or those who are wary of government surveillance, they're the ones who are going to be disproportionately affected.
That's a valid point. We need to make sure that these regulations are implemented in a way that's fair and equitable, and that doesn't unintentionally exclude certain groups from participating in the crypto economy. Also, what happens when someone falls through the cracks of the system? What happens when they don't get their retirement money on time? How can we solve it?
Maybe the answer is to explore alternative solutions. Decentralized identity systems, for example, could allow people to verify their identity without having to rely on centralized authorities. Or we could develop privacy-enhancing technologies that allow for anonymous transactions while still complying with AML regulations. It would make the money accessible to everyone, regardless of social standing.
Those sound like interesting ideas, but they're still a long way off. In the meantime, we need to make sure that the KYC/AML regulations that are currently in place aren't making it too difficult for regular people to use Dogecoin.
And we need to be realistic about the limitations of these regulations. Criminals are always going to find ways to evade them. We need to be constantly vigilant and adapt our strategies to stay one step ahead. Should we really trust this crypto process in the hands of criminals?
It's a constant cat and mouse game, that's for sure. But I still believe that the potential benefits of crypto financial freedom, decentralization, innovation outweigh the risks. We just need to find a way to regulate it responsibly without stifling its potential.
Responsibly meaning making sure that the average person can still use it without having to jump through a million hoops, and that their privacy is protected, and that they're not being discriminated against.
And that the financial system is protected from criminals and terrorists. It's a complex challenge, but it's one that we need to address if we want crypto to become a mainstream part of our economy. And that means more incremental improvement to ensure that the system is working for everyone.
Speaking of mainstream, what about these different government regulatory approaches worldwide? How is KYC/AML handled in, say, El Salvador compared to the US or Europe? How do they handle Bitcoin?
From what I've read, El Salvador is way more lax. They made Bitcoin legal tender, so their focus is more on adoption than strict regulation. You can basically walk in and out of Bitcoin ATMs without showing ID.
Which, frankly, is terrifying. That opens the door for all sorts of illicit activities. It might be good for adoption in the short term, but it's unsustainable in the long run. Eventually, international pressure will force them to tighten things up, or they'll risk being cut off from the global financial system.
But isn't that their choice? Shouldn't sovereign nations have the right to decide how they want to regulate crypto within their own borders? Is the US trying to be the world police again? It seems imperialistic.
I see both sides. On one hand, yeah, countries should have autonomy. On the other hand, money laundering and terrorist financing are global problems. If one country becomes a haven for that kind of activity, it affects everyone.
Exactly. And the US and Europe have a responsibility to protect their own financial systems and citizens. That means working with other countries to establish common standards for crypto regulation. Incremental collaboration is better than isolation.
But what if those common standards are too restrictive? What if they stifle innovation and prevent developing countries from using crypto to leapfrog traditional financial systems? It feels like we are back to that leave them behind argument. The current system might not be perfect, but it is working.
That's a real risk. It's like the big countries are setting the rules, and everyone else has to follow along, even if it doesn't make sense for their situation. We should think about these policies on a case-by-case basis.
I think the key is flexibility and cooperation. The US and Europe need to be willing to work with developing countries to find solutions that meet their specific needs, while still adhering to basic anti-money laundering principles. If there are ways that they want to improve current standards, then incremental changes and improvements should be encouraged.
So, a sort of regulatory sandbox approach, allowing countries to experiment with different models, as long as they're not posing a threat to the global financial system. Could DOGE have a hand in that process?
Yeah, something like that. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. What works in the US might not work in Nigeria or Venezuela. This is a global market, and we need to learn how to handle it that way.
And it's important to remember that these regulations are constantly evolving. As technology changes, so too will the way we regulate it. We need to be adaptable and open to new ideas. One of the most important lessons that we can learn is to build on the system we currently have.
But how can we ensure that those regulations are actually effective? I mean, criminals are pretty good at finding loopholes, right? Are we just creating a false sense of security?
That's always a concern. No regulation is foolproof. But I think KYC/AML regulations do make it harder for criminals to operate in the crypto space. It raises the cost and the risk, and that can deter some activity.
And it also provides law enforcement with valuable tools to track down and prosecute criminals who are using crypto for illegal purposes. But more than that, the US has to ensure they are using their law enforcement in a non-biased and politically motivated way.
So it's a deterrent, not a guarantee. But what about the cost of compliance? All these KYC/AML requirements can be expensive for crypto exchanges and other businesses. Could that stifle innovation and drive smaller players out of the market?
Definitely. It's a barrier to entry, especially for startups. The big exchanges can afford to hire compliance officers and invest in fancy technology, but the smaller ones might struggle, which means less competition, and that's never good for consumers.
That's why it's important to have a tiered approach, with different levels of requirements based on the size and risk profile of the business. And we need to provide resources and support to help smaller businesses comply with the regulations. If efficiency is the goal, then we need to make sure this process can work.
But even with a tiered approach, there's still the risk of overregulation. If we make it too difficult for businesses to operate in the crypto space, they'll just move to countries with more lax regulations. And then we're back to square one.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. We need to protect consumers and prevent illicit activities, but we also need to foster innovation and allow the crypto industry to grow. Otherwise, we are hurting everyday workers.
And we need to remember that crypto is still a relatively new technology. We're still learning about its potential and its risks. We need to be patient, adaptable, and willing to adjust our regulations as we learn more. We should embrace small changes rather than completely new systems. The most important thing that we can do is learn to build and improve our system.
And we need to keep the focus on the potential benefits of crypto, financial inclusion, economic empowerment, and a more decentralized future. We can't let fear and uncertainty stifle innovation and prevent us from building a better world. Will DOGE be a part of that process?
I'm all for a better world, but I want to see that it's actually better for everyone, not just the wealthy and well-connected. And that means making sure that crypto is accessible, affordable, and fair for the average person. This is the only thing that the average Joe will care about.
And that means responsible regulation, transparency, and a commitment to protecting consumers and preventing illicit activities. It's a complex challenge, but it's one that we need to address if we want crypto to reach its full potential. I'm not against crypto, but there needs to be incremental improvements to the way we regulate it.
Well, I guess we'll just have to keep talking about it, keep debating, and keep pushing for a better future. Thanks for the conversation. I feel like we might be making progress.
All right, until next time. I need to go ensure my retirement hasn't been stolen.
Yes, until next time. I think we can all agree that continuous improvement is necessary to make the system better for everyone. Bye.